one curveball that came across my desk recently that resulted in a bunch of research. There's also self-representing plaintiffs out there. There's, not to name names, but there's some repeat offenders that virtually go after hundreds of thousands of businesses making consistent allegations. Fortunately, many of those are actually settled, but tens of thousands of dollars here, tens of thousands of dollars there, it adds up. And I think it's one thing for large enterprises that have the cash available, but size, there's no size discrimination anymore. We've seen it impact even smaller clients that just simply have a website and, they have to suddenly pay a $25,000 arbitration demand. And so I think to your point, you hit the nail on the head with the unknown.
Well, thank you, Lacy and Val, for taking the time and for joining us here. Ladies first, I'll ask Lacy the first question. So when we're talking about ransomware and more traditional cyber insurance claims, what are you seeing in the market right now? What are some of your clients hearing as we're entering the second half of 2026?
The threat landscape hasn't changed drastically as far as how they're gaining access. It's still social engineering. There are some more creative, obviously, and AI is enabling a lot of the language barriers. It's making it a little bit easier for the bad guys to impersonate and just smoothing out any kind of language issues that they had previously. But still seeing a lot of the help desk schemes. Those are still very much happening. Still business email compromise. A lot of the traditional types of attack vectors, really.
Yeah.
So still seeing a lot of that, unfortunately.
Val, same question. What are you seeing?
Very consistent with Lacy. The attack vectors are the same, but I think as far as the types of ransomware, I think there's been a bigger shift from what was previously more encryption focused attacks to data exfiltration focused attacks, because generally speaking, over the past, 5 years, we've seen organizations and enterprises improve their security posture, invest in better backups, become more adept at the response. What that's meant though for threat actors is that they might not get that ransom demand payment that they were hoping to get. And so that encryption technique is no longer as successful than they would have liked. Overall, I think we're seeing a consistent decrease in the number of organizations that are paying demands. And so they've shifted and said, well, if this isn't going to work, let's steal the data. And so a lot of the threat actors are, living in the systems undetected, whether it's via the supply chain, what have you, and, taking data, exfiltrating it, threatening to sell it on the dark web, or sometimes going as far as, contacting businesses, customers directly saying, we have your data. And unfortunately, that translates to a whole slew of risks from the litigation to the notification that we all know.
I think part of the issue or that has historically plagued the bad actors is data is oftentimes encrypted that they're stealing. And maybe they couldn't do anything with it and they couldn't decrypt it. But what I think is really scary is if you think about what is quantum computing going to do in the next, 5 to 10 years, probably be less than that. What is that going to do? And how much data has been stolen and what is that threat landscape going to look like? And how much do they already have? It's scary.
Yeah. I mean, simply put, the keys are getting a lot more smart to add into the locks, right? So if those locks are going to be broken, what is going to be that next step? One of the interesting stats I was looking at this morning, 30% of breaches now involve third parties. Now you mentioned this a little bit about the supply chain. Is that something that when you're looking at just overall clients that's impacting, or is that specific to an industry that you're seeing?
I can take that one because we have a lot of healthcare clients here, and just healthcare in general has such a massive attack surface between, the EMR vendors, all the different cloud providers. So focusing on that industry, vendor breaches are hands down one of the most common types of claims or incidents that we report. Sometimes they don't materialize because it's the vendor itself that's impacted. But I would say for organizations that aren't reliant, especially on cloud providers, we've definitely seen more activity. And I don't think that they discriminate by industry or not. I think it's They're going to go after the Oracles of the world, the Salesforces, a lot of these big tech companies, because their downstream customers are exposed due to misconfigurations. So I think it's generally all industries, and I think everyone's fair game, which is the unfortunate reality.
Yeah. Absolutely. It is the unfortunate reality. And it's one that I think we're seeing a lot of interesting, let's say, conversations come out of it, right? Especially around, and Lacey, I'd like to love for you to your thoughts on this. When you're talking to a client and either matching them with you renewing their insurance or going out looking for a new insurance partner, what are some of those thoughts or some of those ideas that you're talking about in the room about these kinds of incidents?
Well, specifically with the third party, it's challenging,
Yeah.
especially as you're outsourcing more and more services. I always tell clients you're outsourcing the function, not the liability. And that's why it's so important to look at the contracts. Obviously, we want to transfer risk if at all possible. And then using tools like some of these brand perception tools that are widely available where you can understand, at least from what their risk profile looks like from an outside in scan. So there's quite a few of them out there, and that is a helpful data point, but also just understanding when you're entering into the agreement, do you understand what they're going to be doing with your data? Do you get it back? How is it being stored? I think just doing your due diligence is really, really important. And then the backstop being insurance and looking at it from, I have the protections in place if they are down. How detrimental is it going to be your business? Do you have redundancies in place? So I think third party risk management is critical for any organization, but more and more so as we just become more dependent on other businesses, either to supply goods or services or just to have our business up and running. Because I've seen it a number of times where a third party has been down due to either a cyber event or a system failure, and our clients are impacted. And it can be something that closes your business if you're not properly prepared. And just having the insurance as a backstop is very critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Cloudflare comes to mind, right, as something that impacts us all, right? I mean, if it goes down now, we'll be dropping from this call, but it's something that really does touch every single customer, right? And even your firm, I'm sure, like there's a lot of guardrails that are put in place around what's going on with, especially with your third party data. And so let's pivot a bit. So we've been talking a little bit about the cyber side of the world and breaches and claims. Data has come up quite a bit. A lot of what we're seeing now is all these enforcements or these regulations that have come online over the past couple of years have started to be enforced, right? So this is a question for either one of you. When you're seeing these enforcement actions, specifically, you're talking GDPR, a lot of the California laws are coming online now.
Val, go ahead if you want to kick this one off. And
Sure. I think from a cyber insurance perspective, privacy for the past few years almost has unfortunately been an afterthought until we started to see these claims on the rise. And, from our perspective, we're in a very unique position as the brokers because, we see the claims, we see what's out there. And oftentimes we're informing clients for the very first time of some of these risks. And, California has some of the strictest privacy regulations. And, a lot of those claims, such as, metapixel related or wiretapping or SIPA violations, they all stem from there, and they've only increased in frequency. I think from my perspective, privacy should have always been a part of the discussion because at the end of the day, it's consumer trust, it's customer trust. It's a big part of, why businesses protect those crown jewels. And I think when we're speaking with clients, we're telling them what's out there, but also what steps can they take to, understand these risks first and foremost, measure them, mitigate them. And oftentimes, that's working with outside providers such as, yourselves, with law firms to help, to help lower that risk, because unfortunately, these claims come out of the left field completely unexpectedly. And unless a business and organization has been aware, they're going to be completely caught off guard. And that can have implications from an insurance perspective that we're likely going to talk further along, but
Yeah.
can pose financial consequences.
Yeah. And it would impact your premium, right? It impacts the
Totally.
bottom line.
yeah. Well, and and I was just going to say with I think oftentimes how you've always done it isn't necessarily the way that you should continue. So I think it's always important to look at and refresh privacy policies. Like that should be looked at regularly. I'm constantly speaking to clients about, have you talked to counsel about this? Especially, are you collecting any type of biometric information? Is it stored on a device? Is it centrally stored? Really understanding what that universe looks like and who has access to that data as well. Because oftentimes our clients aren't necessarily, they're using a third party service or something like that, whether it's for clocking in and out or it's for accessing buildings. As we become more connected, obviously understanding how that data is being accessed. Do you have the right consents and provisions? And I think a little bit of prevention and spending a little bit of money to have your policies and procedures reviewed and to also look at really that kind of access management to make sure that you don't have any potential access points for the bad actors. A little bit of prevention goes a long way. And I have a friend who's a plaintiff's attorney that does a lot of privacy work. And he's like, I've got more business than I could ever like chase down. And I
Yeah.
don't, and it's interesting having the conversation and where they're going, what they're seeing. And, ideally, I think if we can help our clients avoid those issues, it helps me sleep better at
It as does me as well, right? I think the risk really goes into two different buckets in my mind. There's the known risks and there's the known violations that, not to name names, but Facebook, they violate GDPR every single year and they just pay the fine.
Yeah.
Because it's a business decision, right? In some of these companies, it's a business decision at the end of the day. Then there's the other bucket, which is the unknown, right? There's the ones that they don't necessarily know and what's being either put onto their website in terms of either a pixel or something that's firing from a third party that is collecting information or even sharing information, right? I think there's the unknown as well. And that's where, a lot of companies like ours come in and share that here's what you're missing, right? And I think when you look at your role as brokers and advisors, and really it's that risk mitigation, right? It's, okay, let's make sure we're all on the same playing field. Right? Have you seen anything come through about kind of those unknowns with clients in the room, or are they pretty much aware of what's going on?
I don't think they are. I've been talking about privacy, just risk in general,
Yeah.
obviously being in the
Yeah.
space. I'm risk adverse. And so I'm talking, it's like doom and gloom oftentimes.
Mhm.
And I feel like I've been like Chicken Little and the sky's falling with
Yeah.
these privacy related matters.
Yeah.
It's again, I just want folks to avoid the circumstances. So whatever we can do. But I think, part of the problem is marketing is doing these things in a vacuum. And IT doesn't understand what's happening. And whoever's responsible for the business risk, whether it's finance or there's a risk manager, they have no idea. So just like IT, it's an enterprise risk. And I don't think it's viewed that way. And in order to really look at risk profile holistically, everyone needs to have a seat in the room, including marketing, which I think has oftentimes been, tucked away and doing their own thing. And they really need to be brought into the conversation and understand, do we need all of these ad trackers? Do we need all these cookies? Are we aware that we have keystroke logging? I mean, all this stuff is really important and there are real ramifications. And I don't think just sticking your head in the sand and hoping that, it'll resolve itself or just blaming ignorance is necessarily, the best outcome for any organization.
Absolutely.
If I may, Bill, just one curveball that came across my desk recently that resulted in a bunch of research. There's also self-representing plaintiffs out there. There's, not to name names, but there's some repeat offenders that virtually go after hundreds of thousands of businesses making consistent allegations. And unfortunately, many of those are actually settled. But, tens of thousands of dollars here, tens of thousands of dollars there, it adds up. And I think it's one thing for large enterprises that have the cash available, but size, there's no size discrimination anymore. We've seen it impact even smaller clients that just simply have a website and, they have to suddenly pay a $25,000 arbitration demand. And so I think to your point, you hit the nail on the head with the unknown. This is both unknown and sometimes completely misunderstood or however you want to phrase it. But there's the risk of plaintiffs firms, but there's the risk of individual plaintiffs too, which I had no idea about, but it's a whole thing. So
Yeah.
privacy is something that I think every organization should take seriously, whether they're, a small business or going up to the Fortune 100s.
Absolutely. And education is a critical part of that, right? And how you get that education to them as advisors and really help them with that risk, right? I'm old enough to remember, and you probably both are too, when websites first started getting a lot of violations around kind of the different kind of handicap kind of stuff, like the size of the fonts and the colors. That was relatively unknown for a while. And then all of a sudden people just started, you just go to a random website and they're like, oh, the color contrast is off. So I'm going to open this lawsuit. And same thing, like it wouldn't be a large number to a lot of companies, but it was enough to where you start seeing vendors in the space started popping up and being able to auto correct the depth perception or the size of the fonts or whatever it may be. I feel like there's that education piece that hasn't quite caught up with the market yet to a certain extent. And you probably are sitting in the room every day, like you said, Lacy, the chicken little thing, like, okay, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. I mean, the reality is it's happening. There's millions of dollars of fines that are coming through. And we're not talking, this is not a small number now. And it's happening in this volume where all of these enforcement actions are starting to come online. There's an inflection point now in the market, and it's really interesting to have this conversation with both of you, but also have it right now as we're entering a lot of the AI world as well, where a lot of these AI acts are going to start not just coming onto the books, being enforced.
Right, son.
Yeah. So dipping our toe into AI a little bit, what are those conversations, or what are you seeing as it relates to, let's just say, just risks for your clients on AI?
Well, I think one of the hardest things for organizations is understanding what employees are doing with the data and sanctioned versus unsanctioned. I think a lot of organizations haven't necessarily clearly defined what AI is acceptable, what is not acceptable. They don't have perhaps a data loss prevention tool in place. They don't have mobile device management tool in place to really understand and kind of capturing what's being done with that data. And again, is it an open source tool? It really should be an enterprise tool where it's an enclosed environment with the data, with the AI. But I don't think a lot of organizations are thinking about it in those terms. And then you've got employees that are just plugging things in, and it could be training an LLM, or they're putting confidential information out there. So it's really just understanding what they're doing with the data, how it's being protected, and there should be some sort of governance in place. And again, I think it goes back to privacy policy, understanding how it's being used and what's being done with it is really critical.
I think to piggyback off of that, IBM publishes their cost of a data breach report each year, and I'm always fascinated with the statistics. The previous report had a lot of focus on artificial intelligence, both used on the defensive side and on the offensive side. There's one specific schematic or chart in the report that shows you factors that impact the cost of a data breach, whether it's increasing or decreasing. Shadow AI, as Lacy alluded to, actually increased it roughly about 200,000. I think that underscores that there's a serious risk out there. And my observations have been that most companies actually don't have a governance policy in place. So I think getting that is going to be table stakes to begin with, especially as we kind of move to the next few years. But also enforcing these, which is going to be very difficult because you can't, you don't have visibility and you can't micromanage every single employee. So what they do on the corporate device, that's one thing, but what they could do on their own mobile device or personal devices, you don't really know. And so I think there's that unknown is only going to get bigger and more difficult to manage as we go into the future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's a perfect setup for the next question, which is this gap is going to continue to widen, right? as we get into really an unknown of the next year. The regulations are coming online, so they're going to be enforced. So we're going to have this world where regulations are online. A lot of companies won't be caught up to those regulations, and there will be all this enforcement action. If you were, say you are we'll flip the script here. You are the CFO of this company. What are questions that you want them to ask you in the room, right? To get to understand that risk. What are some of those? What should they know that they're not asked? Does that make sense?
I think from a total risk standpoint, I think still just from a limit adequacy, contracts, how much are you representing that you have? Those are all critical. And then what are we looking for? What's on the horizon? And what are the biggest challenges that we're seeing? So I don't know that that's coming up oftentimes. Cyber may not be the biggest spend, so it doesn't get the most attention. But I think when you get the right folks in the room and you're having the conversation around the risk and understanding what's potentially at risk, especially because you think about it from a business income standpoint, most folks are grossly underinsured because the cyber policy provides coverage for non-physical business interruption. And I think that's oftentimes overlooked. So really, there's a lot of facets to it and a lot of data needs to be reviewed in order to put together the right number. But I think oftentimes folks are just underinsured. And I don't know, it's a little bit of a secret sauce, I think, what the actual right limit is. And there's different tools, different ways of getting to the heart of what the right limit is for an organization. I mean, those are some of the things that I think about that I think
Yeah.
are oftentimes overlooked or glossed over just because lack of time. And our president always says, nobody wants to spend time, money, or energy on insurance except for maybe like us that love insurance because that's what we do. So anyways.
Yeah. And valid question for you, kind of continuing on what Lacy said. Are you seeing any of what those concerns are brought into like negotiations? So like, are you seeing those negotiations harder or more difficult as we're entering this unknown, or is it pretty much the same when you're living about?
By negotiations, do you mean with the individual insurance companies and trying to place?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like how much they're going to.
Sure. It's a good question. I would say things have been fairly consistent. I mean, what we've seen in the market, and I'll let Lacy chime in with her thoughts, but there are some carriers, let me rephrase. There's a mixed bag approach right now.
Sure.
There's plenty of cyber insurance companies out in the marketplace. Cyber insurance is different from property general liability in the sense that every form is different. No two policies are going to be the same for the most part. With that said, some insurance companies have chosen to provide clauses that contain affirmative coverage for artificial intelligence driven incidents, such as deep fakes, which would tie to social engineering, or security breaches related to AI. Some are completely silent. And there's varying, opinions on that. Some would prefer ambiguity from an insurance perspective. Some would prefer the affirmations. We haven't gotten to the point of exclusions yet, which they could potentially be coming, further down the line, or maybe not exclusions, but rather some restrictions. But they're definitely, in the works. Now, from the broker perspective, we are trying to, ensure that there's no adverse exclusions that could impact coverage. And not really seeing that in cyber right now. I think there's some more on directors and officers, but probably a different discussion with different considerations. In short, it hasn't really impacted how we negotiate. But with that said, the market is soft. Carriers are hungry for business. We are always trying to expand coverage for our clients and, pull out exclusions that are not beneficial. And so whenever we can, we're certainly trying to capitalize on this market to, place policies for our clients that, truly transfer their main business risks.
Yeah. And I think, at the heart of it, most AI is really just, software engineering. We're moving into agentic AI, but most of it's still, it's not, and I just tell clients, it's software at the heart. It's just, we're talking about technology that's enabling a service, tool, et cetera, product. So thinking about it from that perspective, I think helps gain a little bit of perspective. However, when you're having underwriting meetings, the carriers do want to understand, how are you managing that risk? Do you have an AI governance committee? Are you reporting that to the board? How is that being managed? And is it reviewed? Because I have a friend and he said, need to be enabling business to move quickly and efficiently. However, we cannot have a bunch of people running around with scissors. How do you manage that? And I think that's the most critical component for anyone running a business is obviously you need to keep up, and right, wrong, or indifferent, artificial intelligence is going nowhere. So it's like you just gotta hop on the train and you need to sort it out and figure out what's the right fit for your organization, but you need to do it safely. And you can't have a bunch of people running around with scissors.
That's a good metaphor. Yeah, you definitely don't want that. So I think this has been great. Any last thoughts or anything about what we've been talking about?
So I have one, and curious to get both of your thoughts on this, but talking about regulations, there's one that I think has significant implications that are yet to be seen in the cyber insurance industry, and that's the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, CIRCIA, which is expected to pass later this year. There's speculation on when and how, but there are some very strict reporting requirements within that with respect to both ransomware payments, but also cyber incidents that reach a threshold of what I would say significance. There's some similarities that can be drawn between this and the cybersecurity rule for the SEC and publicly traded companies. But I think what many businesses are not aware of right now is how broad the scope of what is considered to be critical infrastructure is under this rule. There's 16 different industries that are considered critical infrastructure, but under that umbrella, there's a lot of businesses, even such as healthcare, nursing homes. There's several different types of organizations that have no idea that they're going to be encompassed by this. So I think that's going to be very critical. It could result in an increase in fines and penalties further down the line, depending on how the administration treats it. But it's going to be interesting to see how that interplays with insurance, because timing requirements are always a balancing act. When to do things early versus when to not to do things too preemptively. I think it's a risk balance. That's the one that certainly comes to mind on my end, and I'm very closely tracking it.
Interesting. And you're right. And that kind of goes into what we were talking about a little bit earlier of those unknown variables, those unknown risks, right? How do we, as these regulations are coming online, how do we help steer those clients towards that education, right? Which is sorely lacking right now. Because like you said, there's a lot of companies that don't even know this may apply to them.
Well, what's scary in my opinion is deep fakes, because right now we're all talking to each other, but none of us could be real, or one of us could be fake. And I know.
Well, my large cup of Starbucks here proves that hopefully I'm real. Unless that was just hazard.
That's a lot of coffee, Bill.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. It's been a long night. Lacy, what do you think? Final thoughts? Or
Yeah. I think about, I'm currently taking an AI class. So I'm very much thinking about AI. And also one other thing I didn't mention was when you have AI and you're deploying it in your environment, it's also understanding and almost treating it like an employee that you also have to limit its access to a certain point. Because I've certainly heard of circumstances where bad actors gain access to the system and they can actually weaponize have it go and gather all the critical information. Really understanding from when you are deploying these tools, do they have the right access management, and really viewing them from the same standpoint as you would an employee, and just understanding what do they have access to? Do they need access to everything? Just like everything. So that's probably what I would think about. And obviously the EU AI Act is going to be fully in effect in the not too distant future. So how are organizations best positioned? And it seems like the EU is really where it starts and then it ripples out. So if you're following it, hopefully you're better set up for what happens in, I'm just going to assume, California now.
Right. And as you see it now, which is interesting, it goes EU, California, and then all the other states are starting to pass their own flavor of whatever it is. And what's interesting is that different flavor of, to say, the AI Act, for example, it's all a little bit different, right? So you've got either certain thresholds, or you've got different numbers that you're looking at per state now, which is a really interesting thing. So it's not a one size fits all. right? And it's funny, we're talking about AI, and it's almost like art imitates life, right? So I don't know if you ever watched Silicon Valley, but there was an episode where one of the coders put AI into the software and said to eliminate all the bugs, and it deleted the entire code base. And it's like, well, technically it was correct. It removed all the bugs, right? So, the employees getting access and using AI, as they feel it's fit, needs a governance, absolutely, or else something like that. It probably has happened and we just haven't seen it, right?
Yeah.
Completely agree.
Well, you think about like Project Glasswing and the finding vulnerabilities in almost every operating system. Terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just at the speed is just pretty incredible. Anyways, it'll be
Yeah.
interesting.
Absolutely.
Certainly.
And how interdependent things are too, right? Because a lot of companies use the same video player or the same, social media plugin, and all of that can be easily accessed and manipulated from that third party perspective that we talked about earlier. So, yeah. Well, thank you both for your time. I think this has been fantastic. So I appreciate the conversation.
Oh, of course. Thank you for the opportunity. Glad to be a part of this. We're all playing our own roles and helping educate, our clients and the world. Like you said, privacy is here to stay and it's not going away and it's only going to get more complex. So we appreciate it.